Human fought against 200 alien pirates to save the princess. Her surprising offer left him speechless. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. David Hunter, a battle-hardened warrior, stood at the edge of the war-torn landscape. His ship, the Vanguard, lay in ruins, engulfed in a thick cloud of smoke rising from the wreckage. The battle had been brutal. 200 alien pirates, fierce and relentless, had ambushed his ship in deep space, leaving him with nothing but his combat gear and his will to survive. His armor, once shining with pride, was now scratched and battered, a testament to the desperate fight he had just endured. His breaths were heavy, each one a struggle against the weight of exhaustion. The sound of distant explosions echoed in the air, and the acrid stench of burning metal mixed with the cold emptiness of space. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, David stood tall. His mission had been clear: protect the princess, ensure her safety at all costs. But now, with his ship destroyed and his crew lost, the only thing left was his resolve. As he scanned the wreckage of the battlefield, David's sharp eyes caught sight of something in the distance, figures emerging from the smoke. They were alien pirates, scavenging the remains of his ship, but there was no time to deal with them. He had to find her. The princess. She had been taken aboard the enemy's vessel, and it was up to him to rescue her, no matter the cost. He stumbled forward, pushing his aching body to its limits, knowing that every second counted. His comms were dead, and he was alone, with no backup. Just him and the pirates. But he couldn't stop now. The princess depended on him. He reached a broken-down shuttle, its doors barely hanging on their hinges, and forced them open. Inside, the faint hum of a working engine offered a glimmer of hope. This shuttle was his only way to follow the pirates. Without hesitation, David powered it up, knowing full well the risk of chasing them through hostile space. The pirates would be waiting for him, but he had no choice. As the shuttle's engines roared to life, David set his course, determination burning in his eyes. He would save her. He had to. The pirates didn't know who they were dealing with. David had faced worse, much worse, and he wasn't about to let a group of alien pirates stop him from completing his mission. He gripped the controls tighter, preparing for what was to come. The countdown to the final showdown had begun. The next few minutes would decide everything. Would David be able to defeat 200 alien pirates and save the princess? Or would this be his final battle? Stay tuned to find out what happens next. David's heart raced as he guided the shuttle through the dark expanse of space. The remnants of his ship were now a distant memory, swallowed by the cold void. His fingers tightened around the controls, knuckles white with determination. His mind was focused solely on the mission ahead. The pirate's vessel was not far. He could see it on his radar, a menacing silhouette drifting among the stars. His body ached from the previous battle, his energy drained, but he knew he couldn't afford to stop now. Not when the princess's life was on the line. The shuttle hummed steadily, its engines purring like a predator ready to pounce. David adjusted his course, steering the shuttle toward the pirate ship's trajectory. His eyes narrowed. He wasn't going to let the pirates escape. His ears were filled with the soft beeping of the shuttle's radar, the only sound in the otherwise eerie silence. For a moment, he allowed himself to think back to the days before all of this, the calm, the peace. It seemed like a lifetime ago. The life he had known had been shattered the moment he was thrust into this battle, fighting for survival on a hostile planet against forces he had never imagined. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden flicker of the control panel in front of him. A warning light flashed red. Pirate ships were closing in fast. He gritted his teeth. They knew he was coming. The pirates must have detected his shuttle. They weren't going to let him make it easy. He quickly checked the shuttle's weapons systems, hoping they were still operational. The last thing he wanted was to face the pirates without any firepower. The guns powered up with a reassuring hum, their energy levels at full charge. David exhaled in relief. He was ready. The pirate ship loomed closer, its dark hull now filling his view screen. He could make out the glowing red lights of the ship's weapons, targeting him. He He was about to enter enemy territory, and it was going to be a fight to the death. With one final deep breath, David pushed the throttle forward. His shuttle shot forward into the heart of the pirate fleet. The enemy ship opened fire first, blinding David with a burst of laser energy. He swerved the shuttle to the left, narrowly avoiding the blast. His heart pounded as he retaliated, firing back at the pirate ship. The lasers from his shuttle streaked through space, connecting with the pirate ship's shields. The impact sent a shockwave through the shuttle, rattling David's bones. The pirates weren't going down without a fight. David's hands flew across the controls, his fingers a blur as he dodged and weaved, narrowly avoiding incoming fire. His focus was unwavering as the battle unfolded before him, each movement calculated, each decision critical. As he closed the distance between his shuttle and the pirate ship, he could see the pirate crew moving across the deck, preparing for an all-out assault. David's mind raced as he plotted his next move. He knew he couldn't afford to take them head-on. He had to find a way inside their ship. A surprise attack. That's what he needed. His eyes scanned the pirate ship's exterior, looking for a weak point. And there it was, a small hatch, barely visible among the chaotic mess of metal. David's pulse quickened. That hatch was his ticket inside. Without hesitation, he adjusted his shuttle's course and dove toward the hatch. The ship's system screamed in protest as David pushed the shuttle to its limits, narrowly dodging another barrage of laser fire. The hatch was closing. He was running out of time. With a roar of the shuttle's engines, David dove straight for the opening. Just as the hatch began to close, he made it through. His shuttle lurched as it squeezed through the narrow passage, the sides of the ship scraping against the metal. He held his breath, praying he wouldn't get stuck. Then, with a final jolt, the shuttle passed through. Inside, he found himself in a dark, cramped space, the air thick with the smell of oil and smoke. The pirate's ship had seen better days. The walls were scarred with blast marks, and the floor was littered with debris. David quickly unstrapped himself from the pilot's seat, his muscles protesting the movement. He didn't have time to waste. He had to find the princess. He reached for his rifle and exited the shuttle, his boots echoing in the narrow corridor. The sound of alien voices drifted from deeper within the ship. He crouched low, moving silently through the shadows, relying on his training to stay hidden. He couldn't afford to alert the pirates. Not yet. As he made his way deeper into the ship, his thoughts turned to the princess. Where was she? What had they done to her? He couldn't shake the image of her delicate face, her eyes full of fear as she had been taken. He had promised to protect her, and he would, no matter what. He turned a corner and froze. There, standing in the dim light, was a group of pirates, armed and looking for trouble. But they weren't his concern right now. They weren't the ones who had his focus. As David moved to take them out, a sudden noise from behind him made him stop in his tracks. He spun around, rifle raised, ready for whatever came next. And there she was, the princess, her figure barely visible in the shadows, but unmistakably her. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. She was alive, and that's all that mattered. David's breath caught as he stared at the princess, standing just a few feet away in the dimly lit hallway of the pirate ship. Her appearance was a mix of elegance and vulnerability, but her eyes, wide with shock and uncertainty, locked onto his. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence was thick, only broken by the distant sounds of alien footsteps and muffled voices from the pirates roaming the ship. David's pulse raced, and his heart hammered in his chest. This was it. He had found her, but the mission was far from over. His thoughts raced. He had to act fast. He could see her shivering, her clothes torn, her hair disheveled, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. Princess Alina, David whispered, his voice low and steady, trying not to startle her. She didn't answer immediately, her eyes still scanning him as though unsure whether he was real or another trap set by the pirates. Slowly, she took a step toward him, her movements cautious, but as she did, the pirate ship's walls seemed to groan, adding an eerie soundtrack to their tense encounter. David glanced over his shoulder, hearing the footsteps of approaching pirates, their voices drawing closer. They couldn't stay here. We have to move, David said, his tone sharp. Follow me, and stay close. Without waiting for her response, he started moving down the narrow corridor, his boots making little sound on the metal floor. Alina hesitated for a moment, but then quickly followed, her feet light despite her apparent exhaustion. They rounded a corner and ducked into an abandoned maintenance room, the flickering lights casting strange shadows across the cluttered space. David quickly shut the door behind them, his heart still racing, but his mind clear and focused. He scanned the room, nothing but old equipment and spare parts. It wasn't much, but it would have to do for now. He turned to Alina, who was breathing heavily, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to calm herself. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softening for a brief moment. She met his gaze, and he saw the mixture of fear and gratitude in her eyes. I think so. But they've taken everything from me," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think anyone would come." David nodded grimly. "You're safe now, but we're not out of the woods yet." He glanced at the door, listening for the sounds of movement outside. The pirates would be looking for them, and it was only a matter of time before they found this hiding spot. Alina stepped closer, her gaze searching his face. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. David's lips curled into a tight smile. "I wouldn't leave a mission incomplete." He paused, remembering the battle, the near-death moments, and the sheer will to survive that had brought him here. "You're my responsibility now, Princess. I'm not leaving without you." Her eyes softened, but there was still a hint of disbelief in her expression. "I never thought I'd hear those words from someone like you. I thought humans were nothing more than expendable soldiers, but you—" Her voice trailed off, and David could see the weight of her words. She had been raised to view humans as lesser beings, not worthy of consideration, and here he was, willing to risk everything to save her. "I'm not just any soldier," David said quietly, his gaze meeting hers. "I'm the one who's going to get you out of here." They both stood in silence for a moment, the gravity of the situation settling in. Suddenly, there was a loud noise from the hallway, a door slamming open. David's instincts kicked in. "Get down," he hissed, pulling Alina to the ground behind a pile of crates. He motioned for her to stay quiet. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the corridor, getting closer. They weren't alone. The pirates were searching for them. David's hand moved to the gun strapped to his side, his fingers brushing the cold metal. He didn't want to kill anyone unless he had to, but these pirates had taken everything from him. And they had taken her too. The door to the maintenance room creaked as it began to open. David's grip tightened on his weapon. This was it. He wasn't going to let anyone stop him now. As the door inched open, David leapt into action, rolling toward the entrance. He caught sight of the pirate standing in the doorway, just as he raised his rifle. With a swift motion, David dove forward, knocking the weapon out of the pirate's hands and sending him crashing to the ground. Before the pirate could react, David was on him, his fist connecting with the pirate's jaw in a clean, decisive blow. The pirate went limp, and David quickly grabbed the weapon. "Stay down," he whispered to Alina, turning to face the remaining pirates. The room was small, but he would make it work. He was going to fight his way out if he had to. There was no turning back now. David's heart raced as the pirate ship's air grew thick with tension. He could hear the heavy footsteps of more pirates approaching the maintenance room. He barely had a moment to catch his breath before he turned to Alina, her wide eyes locked on his. She was terrified, but her face held a quiet determination. David knew this was a defining moment, not just for him, but for her too. She had to trust him. He had to get them both out of here alive. The room was cramped, and the only exit was the same door the pirates had just opened. David's mind raced as he quickly scanned the room for another way out. The pirates' voices grew louder as they neared the room. They were coming for them, and time was running out. "Stay close," David whispered to Alina, as he crept to the side, his weapon ready. "We're not done yet." He had to act fast. The pirates weren't just looking for him. They were looking for Alina, the princess, and they weren't going to stop until they had her back. The door creaked as it opened fully, and David held his breath, moving silently into the shadows. The pirates entered, their weapons drawn. They paused as their eyes adjusted to the dim lighting. David could feel the sweat on his brow as the first pirate moved further into the room, unaware that he was about to meet his end. Without a second thought, David lunged, knocking the pirate's weapon to the side and tackling him to the ground. The pirate struggled beneath him, but David's grip was ironclad. With a swift motion, he slammed the pirate's head into the metal floor, knocking him unconscious. David quickly grabbed the rifle and turned to face the others. "Move now," he barked at Alina. Alina didn't hesitate. She followed his lead, her movements surprisingly agile despite the fear. David scanned the remaining pirates. There were 3 left. He had to take them out before they could alert the others. The first pirate turned just as David raised his rifle, but he was too slow. A clean shot, right to the chest, and the pirate crumpled to the floor. The second pirate, hearing the shot, whirled around in panic, but David was already there, his fist connecting with the pirate's jaw. The impact sent the pirate flying backward, crashing into a wall, unconscious before he hit the floor. 1 left. The last pirate, bigger and meaner than the others, snarled as he raised his weapon. David's pulse spiked. The pirate fired, but David was faster. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast, and rolled toward the pirate, disarming him in a fluid motion. The pirate struggled, but David's training took over. With a quick elbow to the face and a punch to the gut, he sent the last pirate crashing to the floor. The room fell silent once more. David stood, breathing heavily, as he turned to Alina. "That's the last of them," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Alina nodded, still in shock, but clearly relieved. "Where do we go now?" she asked, her voice shaky. David looked around, searching for a way out. The ship's control room wasn't far, but it was heavily guarded. They couldn't go through the front. He would have to find another way. "We need to move fast," David said. "There's a maintenance tunnel near the back of the ship. It'll take us to the control room, but it's risky. We'll have to move quietly." Alina's face hardened with determination. "Let's do it." They moved swiftly through the pirate ship, their footsteps light as they navigated through the narrow corridors. Every shadow seemed like a threat, every sound too loud. David could feel his senses on high alert, his hand always ready on the rifle as they crept past rooms filled with pirate soldiers. The ship felt like a ticking time bomb, with every passing second bringing them closer to discovery. They reached the maintenance tunnel entrance without incident. David pushed the door open slowly, and they slipped inside. The tunnel was dark and narrow, but it was their only chance. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, the faint hum of the ship's engines filled the air, a constant reminder that they were still in enemy territory. David's thoughts raced as he led the way. They had to make it to the control room, but he knew they weren't out of danger yet. The princess was still a target. He couldn't let his guard down. He glanced over at Alina, who was still following closely behind, her eyes wide with uncertainty, but also a growing sense of trust. She had come this far, and now there was no turning back. "We're almost there," David murmured, but his voice was drowned out by the loud sound of footsteps echoing through the corridor. They had been discovered. The pirates were closing in. David's heart pounded in his chest. He had one chance. The control room was just ahead, but would they make it before the pirates found them? With a burst of adrenaline, David grabbed Alina's arm and pulled her forward, urging her to move faster. The stakes had never been higher. They had to make it. They didn't have another choice. David and Alina rushed down the maintenance tunnel, the echo of their hurried footsteps blending with the hum of the pirate ship's engines. The faint light from the tunnel's overhead lamps barely illuminated their path, but they kept moving forward, driven by urgency. David's mind raced as he thought of the control room just ahead, the one place that could get them out of this mess. He knew time was running out. The pirates were closing in fast, and he had to make sure Alina reached safety. They turned a sharp corner, and David's eyes locked onto the reinforced door at the end of the hall. That was it, the control room. He reached for the door, pulling out a small plasma cutter from his belt. "Stay low and stay quiet," he whispered to Alina. She nodded, her face pale but determined. As David started cutting through the door's security panel, the quiet hum of the ship's systems became a constant background noise, almost drowning out the sounds of his work. Sweat dripped from his brow as the cutter's plasma flame flickered, making the air heat up in waves. They had to get in quickly, or the pirates would catch up. Just as he finished the cut, the door slid open with a hiss, revealing a large, dimly lit room filled with blinking consoles and monitors. The control room. David motioned for Alina to follow him, and they slipped inside. He moved quickly, checking the security systems. The room was empty, no pirates in sight, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. "We need to lock the doors and get the systems online," David said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He moved toward the central console, fingers flying over the controls, activating the ship's defensive systems. As he worked, Alina stood by the door, her eyes scanning the room nervously. She had never been in a situation like this before, and David could see the fear in her eyes. But she was brave, stronger than most people would have been in her shoes. The pirate ship was massive, and every corner seemed to hide more dangers, but David was confident they could make it out. Just as the ship's defenses powered up, a loud banging sound echoed from the hallway. The pirates had arrived. "They're here," David said grimly, looking over at Alina. "We have to act fast. Lock the door behind me and stay here. Don't move unless I tell you to." Alina hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to stay by his side and knowing that he was right. "I trust you," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. David nodded once, his jaw tight, and then he turned toward the control panel, activating the ship's emergency weapons systems. The room's lights flickered as a force field enveloped the entire room, sealing them in. David ran a hand through his hair, taking a deep breath. He had to hold them off long enough to get Alina to safety. He moved toward a secondary console, pulling up a map of the ship's layout. He found the escape pods, located on the lower decks, but the pirates were already making their way toward the control room. He didn't have much time. David grabbed a weapon from a nearby rack, an energy rifle, checking its charge. He knew the pirates would try to breach the door any second. "We have to go now," David said, turning back to Alina. "Follow me. Stick close, and don't make a sound." With a quick glance at the map, he guided her to the far side of the room, where a hidden passage led toward the lower decks. They moved swiftly, but every step felt like it could be their last. The ship's systems were still locked down, and David wasn't sure how much longer the pirates would take to breach the door. As they reached the passage, David turned to Alina, his voice low but firm. "Once we reach the escape pods, we'll be safe. Just a little longer." Alina nodded, her face set with determination. She was still frightened, but David could see the strength in her now. She wasn't the same helpless princess he had met before. She was ready to fight. They slipped into the passage, the cool air brushing against their faces as they moved through the narrow, winding hallways. David led the way, his senses heightened, every sound echoing in his ears. The pirates were close, but they were getting closer to the escape pods. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. They had to make it. "Almost there," David said, glancing over his shoulder at Alina. She was right behind him, her footsteps silent. The pressure of the situation made time seem to stretch, each second an eternity. The escape pods were only a few corridors away, but as they rounded another corner, David's heart skipped a beat. The pirates had found them. A group of them, armed and ready, stood blocking their path. There was no way around them. "We're not done yet," David muttered, his grip tightening on his rifle. He couldn't let the princess down now. They had come so far. With a deep breath, David raised his weapon, taking aim at the nearest pirate. The battle wasn't over. Not yet. David's heart pounded as the pirates moved toward them, their footsteps heavy and determined. He had no choice but to act now. Without hesitation, he raised his rifle, steadying his aim on the closest pirate. His finger hovered over the trigger as time seemed to stretch in that brief, tense moment. A pirate shouted, raising his weapon, and without thinking, David fired. The blast hit the pirate square in the chest, sending him crashing to the floor. The other pirates reacted quickly, scrambling for cover and firing back at him. David's senses heightened as he darted behind a nearby pillar, ducking to avoid incoming fire. His mind raced. He had to protect Alina, but there were too many pirates, and the escape pods were still too far. "Stay down," David shouted to Alina, who was crouching beside him, her face a mix of fear and resolve. She nodded, gripping her own weapon with shaky hands. The pirates closed in, taking positions along the hallway, their weapons aimed at David's last known position. He knew they would try to flush him out, but he had one advantage. They didn't know exactly where he was. Taking a deep breath, David peeked around the pillar and fired a quick shot at a pirate who was attempting to flank him. The shot landed, and the pirate dropped to the floor. Another pirate shouted in anger and returned fire, but David was already moving, darting to the next cover point, staying one step ahead. His movements were calculated, deliberate. He wasn't going to let them pin him down. He glanced back at Alina. who was still crouched behind cover. She was doing her best to stay calm, but he could see the fear in her eyes. David couldn't let anything happen to her. He had to buy them time. "We need to get to those escape pods," David muttered, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Alina nodded, but David could see she was shaken. She wasn't used to this kind of danger. He wasn't sure what would happen if they didn't get out of here soon, but he wasn't about to let them fall into the pirates' hands. He checked his rifle's ammo count and sprinted toward the next cover point, using the walls to shield himself from incoming fire. The pirates were trying to surround them now, moving in from multiple directions. David had to make a choice. He couldn't fight them all off. He needed a distraction. Without thinking, he tossed a small explosive device he had picked up earlier into the middle of the hallway. The pirates shouted in surprise and dove for cover as the explosion went off, sending debris flying through the air. David took advantage of the chaos, sprinting down the hallway toward the escape pods, pulling Alina along with him. "Now," he shouted, his voice sharp. They were close, but the pirates weren't far behind. They could hear their heavy footsteps, their shouts growing louder as they recovered from the explosion. David and Alina reached the escape pod bay, and David immediately began entering the launch sequence. His fingers moved quickly, the sound of his own breath deafening in his ears. He could hear the pirates' voices approaching, but they were almost there. The pod doors began to close slowly, and David looked over at Alina, who was watching him with a mix of awe and fear. "Get inside," he ordered, his voice firm. Alina hesitated for a second, then nodded and climbed into the pod. David followed quickly, sealing the door behind him. He hit the final button, and the pod launched with a sudden jolt, leaving the pirate ship behind them. They were safe, for now. As the pod shot through space, David slumped into his seat, the adrenaline finally wearing off. His body ached, his muscles sore from the fight, but there was a sense of relief. He had kept his promise. They had made it. Alina sat across from him, her face still pale, but no longer filled with fear. She was alive, and that was all that mattered. She looked at him, her expression softening. "You saved me," she whispered. David smiled faintly, though the weight of the battle still hung on his shoulders. "It's what I do," he replied, his voice steady. They both fell silent as the escape pod sped through the vastness of space, the distant stars the only thing in sight. They were alone, but they had made it out alive. David knew their journey wasn't over, but for now, they had escaped the pirates. And that was enough. As the escape pod coasted through the vastness of space, the tension that had gripped David and Alina slowly began to ease. The roar of the pod's engines, once deafening, faded into a soft hum, and the starlit void outside was a stark contrast to the chaos they had just left behind. David sat back in his seat, his muscles still sore from the fight, but his mind was focused on the road ahead. They had escaped the pirates, but they were far from safe. Alina sat across from him, her eyes wide, scanning the control panel in front of her. She looked like she was still processing everything that had happened. "How did you do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you manage to fight them off? All those pirates?" David glanced at her, his face serious, though a faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "You don't survive in this line of work without learning a few things," he said, trying to downplay the exhaustion that had taken hold of him. "But mostly, it's about not giving up. When people are counting on you, you fight. That's all that matters." Alina nodded, though the doubt in her eyes hadn't fully disappeared. She was used to being protected, pampered even. But this was something different. "I don't know what to say," she confessed, her voice shaky. "I never thought I'd be in a situation like this." David's expression softened, and he leaned forward, meeting her gaze. "You did well. You stayed calm when it counted. That's not something everyone can do." She looked away, still processing everything. "You risked your life for me," she murmured. "You didn't have to do that." David didn't answer immediately. He knew what she meant. She was a princess, and to many, her life might have seemed more valuable than his own. But to him, it wasn't about rank or status. It was about what was right. "It's my job," he finally said. "You didn't ask for any of this, but I'm not about to leave you behind." Alina was silent for a moment, her fingers nervously tapping the seat armrest. She had been thrust into a world she didn't understand, a world of violence and betrayal. David could see the struggle in her eyes. "What happens now?" she asked. "Where do we go from here?" David thought for a moment, his fingers running over the control panel. The coordinates they were headed to were still a few hours away, a remote station where he hoped to lay low for a while and figure out their next move. He wasn't sure what the pirates would do next, but one thing was clear, they would be looking for her. "We head to a safe spot, get some rest, and then figure out where to go next," he said. "For now, you're safe." Alina's expression softened, but there was still uncertainty there. She had always been surrounded by luxury, by people who catered to her every need. But now, everything had changed. The attack, the escape, the pirates, it was all too much, and yet, she had survived. David watched her for a moment, wondering if she realized how strong she really was. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. Alina looked up, meeting his gaze, and for the first time since the attack, there was a flicker of determination in her eyes. "I'm not used to this," she admitted, "but I'm starting to see that I have no choice." David nodded, offering her a reassuring smile. "We'll get through this together." The rest of the journey passed in tense silence, with both of them lost in their thoughts. David's mind kept drifting back to the pirates. They had been relentless, and though they had managed to escape this time, he knew it wouldn't be the last time they came after them. The universe was a dangerous place, and he had seen its dangers firsthand. But it was the people he fought for that kept him going. His job wasn't just about survival. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. When the escape pod finally approached the safe station, David's attention snapped back to the present. He began prepping the ship for docking. Alina remained quiet, still processing everything that had happened, but David could see a new resolve in her. This experience had changed her. She wasn't the same person she had been when this all started. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear, he wasn't going to let anything happen to her. As the pod docked safely, David powered down the systems, and they both sat in silence for a moment. "Let's get to work," David said, standing up and offering Alina a hand. She took it, her grip firm. She was ready, and so was he. David and Alina stepped off the escape pod, the metallic floor of the safe station cold beneath their boots. The station was quiet, eerily so, a place that felt abandoned despite the faint hum of machinery in the background. David scanned the area, his instincts alert, even though they were supposed to be safe for the moment. He had been in enough dangerous situations to know that peace was often fleeting. The docking bay was small, the walls covered in dim, flickering lights, and the only sound was the hum of the station's life support systems. David looked over at Alina, who was still processing everything. The princess was no longer the frightened, helpless girl he had rescued. She had changed, become someone stronger, more resilient. He could see it in the way she held herself now, her gaze more focused, her posture less rigid. "We need to keep moving," David said quietly, breaking the silence. Alina nodded, her face still pale but determined. They walked through the station's empty hallways, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. David kept a sharp eye on their surroundings, scanning every corner for any signs of danger. They passed empty rooms and darkened corridors, the station feeling like a ghost town. "Where exactly are we?" Alina asked, her voice breaking the silence as they rounded another corner. "This is a temporary outpost," David replied, his eyes narrowing as he studied a terminal on the wall. "It's off the grid, a place where people like us can lay low without being found. But it's not permanent. We can't stay here long. So what's the plan?" Alina asked, glancing at him. "We need to find a way to contact our allies and figure out our next move," David said, stopping in front of a communications panel. "But we can't risk being traced. We need to make sure we're off their radar." He activated the panel, his fingers flying over the controls as he began to access the encrypted channels. Alina watched him, her gaze a mixture of admiration and anxiety. "Do you think the pirates will follow us here?" she asked, her voice tense. David hesitated for a moment, his eyes fixed on the screen in front of him. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "But we've been marked. They know we're alive, and they'll keep searching for you. We have to move fast." As David continued to work, Alina looked around, her gaze lingering on the dark, quiet station. It was so different from the bustling palace she had known, so cold and empty. It felt like a far cry from the life she had once taken for granted. "I never thought I'd end up here," she said softly, her voice distant. David glanced at her, his expression softening. "I know. This isn't what you were prepared for. But you're stronger than you think. Alina looked at him, the weight of his words settling on her. She had always been sheltered, always protected, but now, in this moment, she understood the kind of strength it took to survive. How do you do it? She asked quietly. How do you keep going? David paused, his fingers still on the console as he considered her question. I don't have a choice, he said finally. When people need you, when their lives depend on you, you just keep going. It's what you do. Alina nodded, her resolve strengthening. She had no intention of going back to the life she had known. She had already left that behind. She was determined to fight, to survive, just like David. As David finished setting up the secure communication, a soft beep signaled that the connection was established. We're good, he said, stepping away from the panel. Now, we just wait for the signal. They both stood in silence, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. They were alone, far from any help, with a whole fleet of pirates likely still hunting them. But for the first time since they had escaped the pirate ship, Alina felt a small flicker of hope. They had survived. The worst, and if they could survive that, they could survive anything. The station was silent, but in that moment, it felt like the calm before the storm. David and Alina exchanged a glance, knowing that the real fight was just beginning. We're not out of the woods yet, David said quietly, his voice low but resolute. But we'll make it through. Together. Alina nodded, her heart steadying. Together, she repeated. She wasn't alone anymore. Not with David by her side. And that was all she needed to keep going. The silence of the station was interrupted only by the occasional hum of the life support systems as David and Alina waited in the small, dimly lit room. The communication panel on the wall blinked softly, signaling that they had successfully established a secure connection. The feeling of waiting was almost unbearable, each passing second weighing heavier on David's mind. He had been through many dangerous situations in his career, but this, protecting a princess, keeping her alive in the midst of a ruthless pirate attack, was different. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something greater. As he glanced at Alina, her eyes focused on the distant monitors, he couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility for her. She had trusted him, followed him through danger, and now, they were on the edge of something new, something uncertain. The pirates hadn't stopped looking for them, and he knew they wouldn't. His hand rested on the rifle at his side, every muscle in his body tense, ready for the next threat. Alina turned to him, her face a mixture of determination and exhaustion. Do you think they'll find us here? She asked, her voice quieter than usual. Not if we stay ahead of them, David replied, though his tone was tinged with uncertainty. He couldn't afford to let her see the doubt in his eyes. We'll be fine. We just need to keep moving. Alina nodded, but David could see the worry still lingering in her eyes. She was used to a life of luxury, not this constant danger. She had faced more in the past few days than most people faced in a lifetime. David had to remind himself that she wasn't just some princess to be protected. She was strong, resourceful, and willing to fight for her survival, just like him. The sound of a beeping console broke the silence. The secure communication channel was active. David's hand shot out to accept the transmission. The screen flickered to life, revealing a face he recognized. It was Commander Ryland, an ally from one of David's past missions. David, do you copy? Ryland's voice crackled through the static. I copy. What's the situation? David replied, his voice steady, but his mind already racing. We've been tracking the pirate fleet, Ryland said. They're still in the vicinity. We've got a plan, but it'll be risky. You need to get to the rendezvous point ASAP. I'll send the coordinates. Understood, David said, glancing over at Alina. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes as she watched him, waiting for an answer. He knew what she was thinking. They couldn't stay here, but it wasn't just a simple escape. It was a dangerous game. We're not safe yet, he said softly to her, then spoke into the comms. Send the coordinates. We'll be there. Ryland's face disappeared from the screen as the coordinates were sent through. David quickly reviewed the map of the station and the surrounding areas. The rendezvous point was on a remote part of the station, hidden away from the main areas. It was their best chance at escape, but it would take all of David's skills to get them there without being spotted. We've got to move, David said, grabbing his rifle and heading toward the exit. Alina followed close behind, her face set in determination. How far is it? She asked, her voice steady. Not far. We can make it, David replied, glancing over his shoulder. Stay close. Stick to the shadows. They moved through the station's quiet halls, their footsteps barely audible as they navigated the dark, labyrinth-like corridors. Each turn felt like a step closer to safety, but David knew they weren't out of danger yet. The pirates could be anywhere, and time was running out. They passed a few maintenance rooms, their doors closed tight, but there was no sign of anyone. David's senses were on high alert. They reached a narrow hallway, and David paused, motioning for Alina to stop. Ahead, a group of pirates was patrolling, their weapons at the ready. David's mind raced as he assessed the situation. They couldn't go through them. They'd be spotted. He needed a distraction. Without a word, he silently motioned for Alina to follow him as they backed up into a small alcove. David reached into his bag and pulled out a small device, setting it on the floor. It was a sound disruptor, something he had used in the past to draw attention away from his position. He activated it, and within seconds, a loud, high-pitched noise filled the hallway ahead, causing the pirates to stop in their tracks. They turned, scanning the area for the source of the sound. David didn't hesitate. He grabbed Alina's arm and pulled her toward the now unattended corridor. They moved quickly, keeping to the edges of the shadows, and finally reached the rendezvous point. It was a small, secure docking bay, just big enough for a single ship. The escape vessel was already waiting, its engines idling, ready to leave at a moment's notice. David breathed a sigh of relief as they boarded the ship, but the job wasn't done yet. We made it, Alina said softly, her voice a mix of exhaustion and relief. Not yet, David replied, taking the controls. We're not out of the woods just yet. We need to stay ahead of them. With one last look at the station, David engaged the ship's engines, and they shot off into the cold void of space. The pirates would be relentless, but David knew that with Alina by his side, they could make it through whatever came next. The real fight was just beginning, but this was the start of their new journey, and nothing would stop them now.